6 months ago, I showed you how I tiled a whole fireplace ready for a log burner to be installed. Well, almost tiled the whole fireplace. At the time, I hadn't installed our new parquet flooring yet, and once you've added the thickness of that, including any self-leveling you need to do, and any adhesive, I didn't know at the time what the finished height would eventually be, which is why I took the decision to mount a batten on the wall further up and start a full tile from there. And this took quite a bit of planning to make sure I had a fullish tile at the top, but also with a fullish one at the bottom as well, so there wasn't any daft little pieces. And the smaller they are, the easier they are to highlight anything that's not square from the floor or the ceiling. And it's these that I'll be installing today before I do the skirting board. I'll show you why around the corner. If I put skirting board on first, I'd have to multi-tool a bit to slot in my tiles. So why not put my tiles on first and then I can put my skirting board on after, up to it. I'll also be discovering whether I can achieve a seamless finish by hiding the important expansion gap that I had to leave with the parquet, and hopefully not need to install any trim in front of it and make some very awkward cuts around the hearth. So we're going to see if my vision worked out. But before tiling, I noticed bulging tile adhesive that had spilled from behind the batten and lots of splashes from my self-leveling compound, which I felt it was now a less stable and porous area on top of the existing SBR coat that I did. And those came off easily with a scraper, although the tile adhesive needed a bit more time and care. For the bottom tiles, I opt for a 2mm gap between the floor and the tiles to allow for any movement, and measure between the packers I placed on the floor and the existing self-leveling spaces that were already trapped behind the tiles from when I did the batten stages. I transfer those different measurements to my tiles, which admittedly I forgot how difficult my pencil lines were to see against the dark textured tiles. And these are porcelain tiles, which are important so they don't crack under heat for the ones surrounding the wood burner, and they're much harder to cut than ceramic. So I'm using a wet tile cutter for this with a diamond blade. Now when it comes to cutting large tiles, I prefer to make an initial 1 or 2 inch cut on one end first, then flip it around and start cutting on the other end, purely because often I've found if I didn't do this, the very last bit can sometimes break off prematurely and create a tiny chip. And that incident can also happen in the middle as it did here, which I think in my opinion is much less noticeable. For cutting the tiles lengthways, I really push my tile cutter to its limits, which in all honesty, I'd recommend buying a bigger one than this with an outfeed table. I'm just using what I've got, and touch wood, I've not broken one yet using it. However, for the test fit, I found they were a bit too snug, so I spent a lot of time doing a practice run with packers and nibbled a bit more off as and when on the tile cutter without cutting too much off, where I'd rely heavily on silicone to cover the gap at the bottom. But when I offered up an offcut to the side section, I noticed I may have made a horrible mistake with my flooring, and I wasn't sure whether I could conceal the expansion gap or not. So I've done all of the back and the side cuts. I'm not going to do the hearth yet because I want to make sure these are in place, leave those to dry. I can edit part of this video, and then once that's set, I can then work around over there. Anyway, what I found was it was very, very fiddly, very tight to try and get it into a 2mm gap. And I had to trim more off than I realised. So that dry lay is done. This one I'm more concerned about, and I'll show you why. Now, when I was cutting the parquet around the perimeter of the room, I didn't actually leave myself a 15mm gap round here because I knew it needed to be smaller if I wanted it to be concealed. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but you need expansion, it's important. Well, these boards are glued down. It's going to be more stable than if they weren't. But even though I made my gap smaller to allow for a 10mm thick tile, what I didn't realise was the contrasting tiles on the back here are 10mm thick. These ones are actually 8. So I am caught short a little bit. I know that it's going to have adhesive behind it as well to pad it out. But a way around it would be to pull the tile out ever so slightly, but not too much where it doesn't look plumb from the side, and make sure that whatever I've left with, I can conceal it with a little bit of cork. I think it's going to be grey. I haven't decided that yet. So I do have a little gap here, annoyingly, that's thicker than the rest. I don't mind the tiny bits, but that is more unsightly. But the back area, that's what I'm left with, but I'm happy I can conceal that. The other problem I've got is when I put a batten on here to tile above it, these spaces have actually dropped a touch. The other one's not so bad, but this one, there's probably 2 mil or more above that. So I have to remove that because I cannot get my tile further up. And obviously when I raise that tile, this gap at the bottom is going to be even more visible. So that's the first hurdle that I've got to deal with. And I'm going to try and do it in a way where I can put one back because they are self-leveling spaces, but I really don't think I've got a chance. I think it's going to be properly stuck there. That one's got to come out as well because it's still not right. It's truly stuck. And obviously I do not want to chip my lovely tiles. The things you do for perfection. I'll try to get perfection. Oh, yes. Oh, I lost it. I lost it. Let's try a different tactic. Oh. I snipped most of the spacer's levelling foot off, but left a few millimetre to secure to the back of the fixed tile so it can do its job, which was still tricky to try and find a snug fit without trimming too much off it. I can't get it. Oh, that goes in, that goes in. No. I marked where I knew they'd fit with a pencil, just in case they fell off. After a quick sweep and remove any debris to prevent a scratched floor, I place a cardboard sheet down and hot glue the tops of the spacers to instantly secure them in place. Also, for insurance, in case I get clumsy with tile adhesive, it's not the first time, I lay out a roll of plastic sheet which has masking tape secured at the end so I could secure it down to the floor. So now I'm ready for tiling. Firstly, I always have a bucket of clean water at hand so I can clean my paddle, and a bucket with my measured water so I can slowly pour the tile adhesive into it while mixing. For this, I'm using Mapai's super flexible adhesive for porcelain tiles, but for areas that are close to the log burner, I'd previously used a heat-resistant one by Palace that you can buy from Tops Tiles. It's not cheap, but the last thing you want to do with your expensive tiles is have them fall off, particularly behind a log burner that's already been installed. Before adding my tiles, I spread as much tile adhesive as I could behind the tile trim at the bottom. Now I'm using a 10mm notch trowel purely because of the size of the tiles, and that should work in my favour later on for the other end. But because there's very little room to move my trowel about, I resort to spreading the rest with a filling knife before going back to it. Get my bottom packers ready, then back butter my tile for better adhesion before pressing it in place. Now to pack it up further if needed from the bottom and the side of the wall and add my self-levelling wedges in, tighten up and wipe any excess adhesive away before moving on to the next one. I've had to peel back the masking tape a little bit so I can see that gap that I need to try and cover. After repeating the same process, I gently pulled the towel towards me to ensure I was happy with the expansion gaps coverage and packed it all up. Now, I only made a small 2kg batch of adhesive and it's got about a 30-minute working time, so I was really scraping the barrel to make sure I had enough. You know what? I just want to say, I've been wearing this mask for ages, completely forgot about it. I don't need it, but I do need these because I've got music on. I'm listening to David Ohm's Ocean's 11 music. I usually play one and see what it takes me. Luckily, I just made it. Now, I've taken this one out for now because something that I've found with these, the tighter you put the wedges, the more these spaces actually get squished. And so you can see that section here is actually narrower than there. Now, one little caveat I should point out is the more you squeeze these, the more it actually pushes the tiles down. So you do have to pack it up even more, which I've packed it up as much as I can. So I've taken this out And I know it's only the bottom one, it's less likely to be seen at eye level. I know that when I push it down, well, I can push it down. So I'm going to just put a packer in there. I know I'm being fussy, but I just want to make sure it's perfect. I don't think you can get it any better than that. So it's been about 24 hours since I put the tiles on the sides and the back. Anyway, for around the hearth, I've gone for my favourite trick, cardboard. So what I've done is just measured all the different points and deducted any spaces that I need, because I will need clearance around the hearth and stuff as well, and to be able to fit it in. This wasn't wide enough, so I just sellotaped a bit on to get to there. And once I cut it down and slot it in, I'll have to lift the spacers. That should give me enough space, hopefully. I might have to nibble a few bits off if it's tight in places. So that one's done, and I've done the other one as well. Now, do you remember when I said sometimes you can chip a little bit off the end of a tile with a tile cutter? And that's what happened with this one here. And I must have originally cut this one for this side because it's actually the same length, but I saved this because I can chop this bit off to fit around here, so that's perfect. So technically I've not broken one yet. Well, I've been able to reuse them all the time. Also, something consistent throughout, I'm having the manufactured edge on this side and my cut end there. And exactly the same for here. This is the manufactured end, that'll be the cut end. And I'm gonna now draw around that on my tile and then go and cut it on a tile cutter. After cutting it down to length, I cut it into the L-shaped piece that I need, then make a series of relief cuts to cut my notch out. Now I'm happy with my cuts, I cracked on installing my final 2 tiles. But something you need to make sure of is because I've got tile trim, I want to make sure it's plumb with the tile. So for these, I ended up having to makeshift some handles with some gaffer tape because they're textured and I don't have a suction cup to manoeuvre it. And now it's my favourite part, malleting these off. Yeah. I'm just putting glasses on in case something flicks in my face. That is bloody noisy. Oh, Hans isn't happy. Is that a drone? Oh, cool. I was wondering what that noise was. That looks quite fun, actually. Bit scary. They seem to be heading in the direction of the sea. Anyway, let's get back to work. So it'd been a couple of days by this point, and I was ready to make a small batch of grout. I work it into the gaps, first cramming in as much as possible, then working diagonally to avoid removing too much. And note, I don't add any towards the bottom between the floor and the tiles because that's where it would be more likely to crack later due to movement. And after 15 minutes from applying, I go back to the starting point and wash the excess off with a wet, clean sponge. Again, diagonally to avoid removing too much. So my grout is all dry. Now I'm ready to do some sealing / caulking. Now, I've decided to go with grey, but I couldn't find a grey caulk for the wall area. So I've had to go with Hemway Sealant, which is a hybrid one where I can paint over it as well. And that was important to me later on if we decide to change the colour on the wall. But one of my concerns is, because obviously we've got an expansion gap behind the flooring, I don't want to squeeze a load in and then it goes into that expansion gap. So I've decided to buy some foam cord stuff. Can't remember what this is called. Foam backing rod, I think. And this is 6mm, it's the smallest I could get. In fact, I did buy this that was 3.5mm, but it's more rubbery. I might use this in tiny areas, but this is how it's going to go. And I quite like the look of this already because it's grey. So you just push it underneath. And I'm not going to push it completely far back where it goes into that hole. And by doing this as well, I won't need as much sealant. So I'm just going to bend it round. I'm just going to put it down. And I'm not going to put it around the hearth because it's not going to expand and contract. Now, I already had leftover grey silicone sealant, but I thought I'd apply the hemway stuff around the hearth and everywhere else, just for ease, because once it's open, it's open. I put some paper towels down to catch any unwanted drips, then apply it into the gaps and spray with Windoline to make it less tacky before removing the excess with a credit card. Anyway, I don't know if you can see it on camera that well, but I just didn't like how stark it looked. It definitely had a whiter, bluer tone than my other one. So I removed it all and went back to my original Towel Master one, which was slightly darker and more subtle. But because both the flooring and the tiles are textured, I painstakingly wiped any excess off using cleaning wipes and sometimes Q-tips for intricate detail. But for the moment of truth, could I hide the parquet flooring that I cut too short? Thankfully, I couldn't see it, and yes, I was relieved. For the side of the tiles adjacent to the wall, I hadn't even thought about backer rod for this area, but because it was so deep, it just made sense using the extra that I had. For this area, I definitely went back to the hemway sealant, sprayed again with Windoline, and took a considerable amount of time wiping excess off because it's quite bright against the painted wall. I don't know what is in this, but actually it's more forgiving if you want to keep going back, spraying it and smoothing it out. But I think it worked quite well to match the grout. So finally that is finished, and I think it worked quite well in the end, and I had a very lucky escape. And I think the obvious message here is measure twice, cut once. Anyway, so the next job I'll be doing is this, fitting skirting. And I think that's going to look very nice. Anyway, if you do anything differently, let me know, and hopefully I'll catch you in my next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.